all of Kenner's Star Wars products during the year of 1977. No toys.
Log?
'Tis the podcast log
Yes, log.
of the Star Wars Collectors Archive blog. Oh.
Yes, log.
Whenever the Star Wars Collectors Archive publishes a new blog, this podcast will log its contents, interview its writers, and go deeper. It's the Kivecast Blog Log Pod.
You, sir, are a mouthful.
Relax and just take life easy for a little while. Because it's only lasts for a little while.
All right, Steve.
Steve, who cares about Star Wars toys?
Not us, right?
No, I'm serious. Like, who cares when Kenner Toys was gonna put something out? It's just a bunch of old toys, Steve, and we should just buy stuff and not think about it, and information should just... There's two options for information, Steve. We should either never get it, or we should get it and then bury it in the ground and never think about it.
Information must die.
Exactly. I think we're doing this all wrong, Steve. We just need to dedicate ourselves to extinguishing information about toys and about collectibles. Because if we just got on here, Steve, and we just talked about the market, or if we just talked about stuff that was really, really expensive, people would love it. And if we came on and talked about drama and talked about, I don't know, Bruce White and Phidias got into another huge fight on Twitter.
Oh man!
And it got real. Phidias actually he went to the wrong Carolina. He went to South Carolina instead of North Carolina. went into the wrong tattoo parlor. Ended up getting into a fight and then falling in love with the person who was working there. It's a whole story. Got his face tattooed. If we told drama and if we just talked about money, people would like it. But people don't want to talk about. Yeah. Anyway, Steve, I'm being facetious because once again we are here to try to promote an amazing piece of work that was done.
To celebrate,
this amazing piece of work done. If hearing me ask the question, who cares about vintage Star Wars toys, gets your blood going, gets your ire up, then just buckle in, because I care about Star Wars toys. I care about what came out when, and I care about what was actually going on in 1977 when Christmas rolled around and when there was the early bird certificate. What was Kenner actually doing? It seems as though, despite the fact there are literally thousands of people on this earth who collect Kenner Star Wars toys, there's only one person who really cares about what Kenner was doing. And that person is Ron Salvatore. So let's get him on the show.
Sounds good.
All right, well, listen, Steve, I just hit record. We've been talking to Ron about how we're going to approach this. I was initially thinking about continuing on my character as the guy who hates Star Wars toys.
Right.
I can't. It still feels like it's a good idea, but Ron says it's a bad idea, and he's
it's
usually
up to you.
right.
You're the master of the podcast. It's technically Sky Payne's podcast.
Very, very technically, that's true with this week's co-host. All right, so Ron, I'm going to stick with it. I'm just a big dummy who doesn't care about Star Wars toys, and I don't read the blog on the SWCA.com.
That's pretty much a good description of you normally.
I was going to say, Sky, I don't know how much of this is truly creating a character. It might just be...
From both sides. Anyway, so I just, apparently you wrote some article about, Christmas 1977, and everybody knows that Kenner was stupid and that they didn't start making toys until too late because they weren't ready. And
they were just poor planners.
Poor planners. Is that the point of your argument, Ron?
That Kenner was stupid?
Yes, and that there was nothing really happening in Christmas 1977.
No, I think I used that as a springboard, probably the fourth time I've used it as the springboard for a blog post, because that idea just sort of grates on me in general, that people believe that.
Yes. It's the idea that won't die.
I heard it again on another podcast. I guess it was the spinoff from the Vintage Rebellion Generation Generation Skywalker. I was going to the Luke Skywalker Generation Skywalker. Not those guys, but someone they were interviewing or referencing brought it up again, and I think it was a person with an actual Lucasfilm connection, and was like speculating that Kenner intentionally delayed the release of the toys. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of I'm not saying I can prove that's wrong, but I just think that's a little bit nutty. The reason they didn't have toys for Christmas was because they didn't even sign on as a licensee to like April or March or something like that, which is obviously right before the movie came out. So that's just pretty much impossible to get toys to market. I mean, plastic toys, it takes about a year. So, if you sign on as a licensee and say like, let's say early April and the movie comes out in late May, there's no way you're going to have toys on, plastic toys on store shelves by, November, when the stuff would need to be out to sell for Christmas. So basically no way that they would have action figures out for Christmas of '77. It just was not possible.
Now one thing that I love, being the big dummy that I am who doesn't care about Star Wars toys, I'm still going to hold on to this idea that Kenner just wasn't ready, because it is the idea that won't die. And what I love is that this article makes reference to your article from the blog from 2014, A Common Misconception, and then that article actually makes reference to Steve Sansweet's From Concept to Screen to Collectible, where you got the information. So, like, before anything, we knew the truth, that Kenner was totally fine, was totally competent. They just didn't have enough time because of the licensing agreement. Yet, what do you think it is? Why do you think people want to believe this so much, Ron?
It's a good story, I guess. I mean, I think it was controversial that they released the early bird certificate, and I put some quotes in there that I dug up from a period newspaper that speaks to that. And I think the fact that there's controversy around it, and the fact that people have this awareness that the early bird certificate was a controversial product, they think that the controversy is related to either incompetence on the part of Kenner or some bizarre scheme on the part of Kenner. When really, the controversy was related to the idea of selling a gift certificate, which in the toy industry hadn't really been done. And obviously, I put some quotes in there from a toy retailer from New York City. Like, there were toy retailers who objected to that whole notion, right? So it was just like, that this is garbage. We're not going to start buying gift certificates from these toy companies. Like, I can't believe they're even asking us to do this. So I think that the vague awareness of a controversy sort of translates to this misconception that Kenner did something wrong in the production of the toys, when really what they did wrong, quote unquote wrong, was try to sell a gift certificate, right? Which kind of annoyed some people.
Yeah,
and annoyed some parents, I think, too.
Yeah, you mentioned the New York retailer, and you make a pretty good connection to the Rankin Bass Burgermeister Meisterburger.
Oh yeah, I love
and
that
I
have
to say, if you read the article, you'll understand. But I think that this character, if we ever continue our vintage costume contest, someone needs to just create this guy as like a Disneyland style cast member of this New York toy store owner as the
quote
Burgermeister.
It's from the San Bernardino Sun, and the quote is, "In major centers like Chicago and New York, the certificates are sold out, and some stores which question the use of certificates for toys refuse to carry them. We sell toys, not promises," said one New York toy store. Like, you can just kind of picture the guy. Like, I just imagine with like a cigar in his mouth. He's like, "We sell toys, not promises." Just kind of walks away.
And the other great thing is, in hindsight, a toy distributor being mad at Kenner and Star Wars. Like, maybe you want to direct your anger somewhere else. Your entire existence for the next 10 years is going to be dedicated to this one company. So
yeah, well, that's a good point. And I think that a lot of retailers made that calculation where it was like, well, geez, we're not going to be left out in the cold and not carry this stuff. But if you're a toy retailer, and it's like, the toy business was pretty ingrained, it was in, at that point in time, the traditions and whatnot, and you have this big property, and now this established toy company is asking you to buy basically nothing, it's like, and the price they're paying is way over what it costs to produce this, cardboard thing. It's just a whole new model. And it's just, you probably are just like, get the heck out of here with this. Like, you start thinking too okay, what other toy companies are going to start doing this? I have to stock these gift certificates every year.
Now, what I think is great,
really happen.
I think maybe Kenner is a little bit to blame with their copy. So in the commercial, it says, "You can surprise your child on Christmas morning with Star Wars fun, ... and again in February." It's like, let's really not hammer home the February part. Although
the funny part is, or the ironic thing is that years later, what does everybody from that period remember? But everybody remembers the early bird set, and I guess the excitement surrounding that. I've never heard someone complain about getting that and not having the figures. It's more of a anticipatory thing where it's like it was part of the whole experience, right? So I don't think it was a bad move on Kenner's part. I think it was smart, and I don't think that kids were disappointed for the most part.
Yeah,
but maybe I'm wrong. I was too young to really be getting Star Wars toys in Christmas '77.
So that ends it, Steve. We've discussed everything that has to do with Kenner in 1977. That's all Kenner did. They made action figures, and that's it. That's all they're really known for. So it's been great having you on here, Ron. I'm dropping in and out of this character, Steve. I don't think it's working at all. Can you please help me pick? Should I be stupid guy or normal stupid guy?
Well, let's switch back to normal stupid.
Okay.
Which is, no. You're appreciative of the content here.
Yes.
So yeah,
okay. So
you don't need to put it on anymore.
So one thing that I like, Ron, about this is that you sort of just want the hits, which is what I'm kind of like leaning towards. Like when you see someone's written an article about early Kenner Star Wars, you really want them to deliver on some hot early bird action. But then you have this other stuff like the Scholastic News Explorer, which I've never seen this before. So this was So Scholastic was the company that sold books and toys in schools. Like, what is the Scholastic News Explorer?
I don't know. It looked like it was like a regular thing that probably got sent, I would guess, to teachers or something that they could share with kids. That would be my guess. I don't know who else would be the market for it because I think Scholastic mostly worked through schools. At least that's my memory.
Right.
Where you could order, you could order books and whatnot. So it probably was done through schools. But obviously, if you read the article, it's geared towards kids. So, I mean, maybe the idea was that the teacher would potentially read these things with kids. I don't know what the educational value of that would be, but maybe it would just be sitting around with their Highlights magazine.
Right. Looking at it, I think that's it, because they also include questions, right? Like they have a math question.
And they're kid-focused.
You're buying a gift. A game costs $5. See if you can answer this, Steve. The box cover shows scenes from a hit TV show. You like the show, but know nothing of the game. Another game costs $5. You have played it and think it's good. Which will you buy? How will you decide? Oh, wait, that's not a math question.
My favorite question is, would a Star Wars watch be an in item? With in quotes.
So it's cool because it poses all these questions. This whole article is really questioning the future of branded merchandise and like licensed items, and it's sort of like at the very beginning saying like they say, what would a product that has Star Wars on it, is that better than a product that doesn't have the word Star Wars on it? And then would it be more fun to give a Star Wars t-shirt or an ordinary one?
Right.
That's why when I found this, it was like I had to buy it. Not that I spent a lot on it or anything, but I was like, I need to get this thing because it's like it gives a snapshot of early licensing, early modern licensing, like how people viewed it, and it also shows some of the early Kenner products, before the action figures were even a thing. Yeah. And you just don't see much that's related to that, so it's a cool item.
Yeah, it's got that gift box that has, like what you're saying, all this early stuff kind of grouped together.
There's factors, the Bradley watches, I think the lunch box is in there. It's got dip dots from Kenner and some puzzles and the board game. Yeah, it's early stuff.
It's really awesome, Ron. This whole thing, this whole question, like how, I don't know, I guess you guys have maybe collected modern toys from time to time, but sometimes you'll see a toy store and you'll be excited and you go in there, and it's what I call a LIF store, learning is fun. and I just get pissed and I turn around. It's like, I'm not here to buy Playmobil. If there isn't something in the store that has to do with a movie or TV that I like, I don't want to be in the toy store. It's like you can see the transition of toy stores into purely licensed things, and this is
Right.
Scholastic sort of really asking these questions just in like 1,000 different ways over and over again. Would a Star Wars toy be something new? And yeah, it is really
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
also,
I don't know.
yeah.
I'm assuming people listening to this kind of know that, but I mean, Star Wars obviously was really. I mean, you could argue about first, but it was really the movie that made modern movie merchandising. So, I mean, prior to Star Wars, it was pretty rare that I think a kid went to a store and wanted an item with a movie on it. It was just that didn't really happen. Maybe a TV show or something like that, or the Chicago Bears or the sports team. But to have a movie, which are usually in and out of theaters pretty quickly, on a T-shirt or a poster or a puzzle or something, was pretty rare. So it was obviously a whole new world that people were stepping into with that.
Now, Steve, a calendar costs $3. It has scenes from other countries on it. Another calendar costs $4.95. It has pictures of your friend's favorite cartoon. Which will you buy as a gift for your friend? Name 3 things to consider before deciding.
Wow, that's so yeah. This is trying to get into the mind of the young.
How pathetic is it that the
consumer.
answer is just so clear, like the cartoon? Like our brains are so polluted by this post Star Wars world. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're using this as a springboard, and basically in this article, in this Scholastic News Explorer, which refers to R2-D2 as a creature, which I always enjoy, there's just a picture of all these early items that were available as of Christmas 1977. So is that the idea, Ron? You want to just put together every single thing that was available from Kenner in Christmas 77?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, with these articles, I try to find like a through line where I can attach several different things I want to talk about, and I think that was maybe the genesis of it. I was like, well, it'd be cool to just do an article about the Kenner products from 1977. What was released in 77? What could you have gotten for Christmas, from Kenner? And then that kind of tied in with some other things I thought about, basically the early marketing of the line with the store displays, because another topic I wanted to talk about. So, but yeah, that was kind of the genesis of it, the 77 products from Kenner, which I think more clued-in collectors realize that, but I think there's a lot of collectors who don't even realize that there was a finite, a very small number of items that were available in the holiday season of 77 before the action figures even hit. It's just not something that I see talked about that much.
Yeah.
And sort of chief among them, you have here the Escape from Death Star game, which I've never played. Have you ever played it, Steve?
No, I haven't.
Have you, Ron?
No, of course I've never played that game.
Well, I don't know.
I play it while I watch The Mandalorian over and over again. I love that little Ugnaught.
What's the hey, what was the Ugnaughts name, Ron, in the movie, in the Mandalorian?
His name is Nolte.
Yes, that's right, Nolte the Ugnaught.
Nolte from Tusk from Nolte.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Yeah, so that board game, that was the first board game I think Kenner had ever developed, and I've never played it, but I want to say this goes back to Steve Sansweet's book, From Concept to Screen to Collectible, that it wasn't that great. It was their first try. And that was actually their agreement, their contract with Fox or Lucasfilm or whatever it was, only required that they produce the board game. So if Star Wars had bombed, they would have just made that game and gotten out, right? So
that could have been the end of it.
They were required to make.
Wow. Isn't that so funny to think about a different universe where you're just rumbling around in a Goodwill and you're like, what's Star Wars? Oh, is that movie that came out that came out like before, I don't know, Clash of the Titans became the biggest movie of all time? Yeah, I guess so.
Well,
and all we have is this lame board game. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, to understand how that worked, all you had to do was look at some of the other, like after they did Star Wars, they picked up Kenner got like the licensing bug. Well, I guess really it probably came off of $6 Million Man, but Star Wars really sent it into overdrive, where they just kind of took chances on licenses, and I've kind of been meaning to write that article, although it's not a Star Wars centric article. Like Man from Atlantis, they picked it up and they produced some things, and then that didn't do that well, so they spun those items off into other toys, or like The Car. Have you ever seen the movie The Car? I think James Brolin is in it, and it's like almost Christine, Stephen King's Christine before Christine.
Oh,
and
weird.
It's about this murderous car.
I think I have seen that. Wait, isn't there like a famous director attached to it somehow? Like, wasn't it the DP or something? Someone
I don't
famous?
remember who directed it. But it's like this car, it has like possessed by demons or something, and it runs people over, and it's just called The Car, the movie. It's a big black car. So for some reason, Kenner has got the license to that, and they produced, I think it's a game called The Car, right? And if you watch the commercial, we'll have to dig up the commercial. There's like a jingle in the commercial, and it's just this really ominous voice. Just goes, "Here comes the car," and it just says that over and over again in the commercial. Obviously, the movie didn't go anywhere, so it was just like, that's whatever, we made a car game. But if the car had been a huge hit, I wouldn't be surprised if Kenner would have made a bunch of other car products.
All based around vehicular manslaughter. Just like...
Exactly. And then, Butch and Sundance, the early years, was another movie, the Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kids sequel, and that bombed, and so they spun it off into the Real West.
Right.
Just to get rid of the stink of the movie name. It's made it a generic West line. And some of that got recycled into Indiana Jones, right? So,
right.
But, that happens. Star Wars, if they only were required to make a board game, Kenner's not stupid. They're not in the business of losing money. Like, they just would have never made anything else, and they probably just would have dropped the whole thing. But, they sign on to the license. A month later, it turns out the movie's a giant success, and it's like, oh, geez. And then they just go into overdrive, developing all these different products. So
Now, speaking of overdrive, I've done a little bit of research here. Do you know when The Car released?
Oh, geez, 78?
May 13th, 1977.
77. There you go.
That's not a great release date for your movie.
Oh, that's...
in Vincent Canby's review, he said it, quote, has all the ingredients of a parody, although someone has made the mistake of doing it straight.
Yeah. It's worth seeing. It's a funny movie. Just it's weird, but it's like totally ripped off by Stephen King for Christine. It's just the same idea. Here comes the car. Like, I think I saw that movie I knew that Kenner had made that toy, and I'd seen the commercial, and I remember joking about it, probably with Chris Dragoulias, about the goofy jingle and everything. And I'm watching the movie, and it just suddenly occurs to me, I'm like, the car, like, this is that Kenner thing is licensed. I didn't even realize that was like tied to a movie, but it is. It's such a weird thing that they would have even picked up that license. And of course, they ended up getting Alien, which is an even more weird license for toys, and that didn't really go well. And I think after that, you started to see them step away a little bit from some of the random movie stuff, and like a lot of toy companies, they moved into cartoons and stuff.
But that does help me
to more viable in a lot of ways.
That helps me understand why they did Alien in the first place, because that always seemed like such an odd thing. But if you put it in the context of the Butch Sundance and the car, here comes... I never heard it, but I like here comes the car.
Yeah, I think it's here. You're going to watch it. It'll be a little bit different. And you'll be like, he was wrong. I know it's been years, but it's something like that. It's just a funny jingle. But yeah, there's just a lot of licenses. Like Man from Atlantis was a TV show, but regardless, they jumped on that, hoping to probably be a $6 Million Man thing, and it didn't go anywhere. And Alien, and even the Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Adventures of Indiana Jones kind of never went anywhere. So
yeah,
a lot of those post Star Wars movie things or even TV things just were not that successful for them.
Okay, so they made the Escape from Death Star game, which
could have been just the Escape from Star Wars game, basically.
The contractual obligation game. All right.
Right.
and then you also go into puzzles. Now we have talked from time to time about the puzzles, Steve. If you'd like, you go back to one of our previous blog log pods.
For further reading and listening, there's there's a lot of content
Scott
there.
Bradley talking about the Yeti Gobbler.
Yes. Gibbity gibbity. And then we have the painting sets, and I didn't know there's more than one painting set. I don't. Are we okay? You have to tell us, Ron. Are we ever going to do an entire episode about Kenner painting sets, or is this the time where we get to talk about them?
I was planning an article on just painting sets in general, and then the guys at Generation Skywalker did a blog post on painting sets that was good, and I was like, well, that kind of stole my thunder on that one. So I would encourage you to seek that out.
Okay.
Those guys did a pretty good article. Kenner had the license though early on, and so they made Dip Dots, which was like a watercolor thing, and then Plaints, which is also a watercolor thing, but larger, and it's just a little bit different. I think the paints were a little bit more like normal paints,
like
than
acrylic
watercolor
type
things from Dip Dots. Yeah.
Okay.
And they made those, and then the license for like paintable poster sets spun off to their sister company, Craftmaster, almost right away, like almost the next year, I think in '78. And so Craftmaster produced the poster sets after this.
Right. I
really,
wonder. I was going to ask, in terms of, I know there were like 16 images for the Dip Dots and then 5 for the larger set. I wonder if any of those were as weird as some of the early coloring book art, just because it was so early on. I haven't actually seen, aside from maybe a handful.
I think they're way less crude.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know who did them, but they're more professional looking than I think the Canadian ones.
Okay.
Especially the Plaints, which are really nice. And
yeah.
One thing I wanted to discuss in that article, which I probably won't do now, is that most people don't know that there was a second edition of Plaints, and there's actually, the artwork is out there. I have a piece that wasn't made. So I think, had Kenner not handed the license off to Craftmaster, I think there would have been a second Plaints edition, probably in '78 to '79, maybe holiday season '78. But that was canceled. So that's an interesting thing that I don't think most people know about. But those are both pretty cool items, and they don't come up that much. I really like the weird early stuff, and so I mean, if I was a collector, those are two things that I would try to nab if I didn't already have them, is the Plaints and the Dip Dots.
Yeah, and also that's also good too. The Generation Skywalker site, we've never actually pumped it here, Steve. I don't know. I guess we just don't pay enough attention to stuff. But that's another good place with another good blog and lots of good information too. So, we need to spread around this. Whatever kind of meager attention comes to this, your guys' blog should also go there as well.
Yeah, no, I don't. Those guys did a pretty good roll up of all that stuff. So check it out when you get a chance.
All right, then you also include so many cool things here, like the order forms. Which are pretty, makes it very clear how little stuff there was. The certificate, the board game, the puzzles, the Dip Dots, and the poster set. Just very few things that you could possibly have.
Yeah, you don't see many of those order forms, but that's the original, form that would have gone to a retailer to select his or her Star Wars purchases, in fall of '77. So I mean, it's a pretty neat item. As well as I think I have the letter in here too, right? It's like the introductory letter.
Yeah.
Like, dear toy buyer, the hottest movie to come along within the millennium is Star Wars. That's another really neat item.
Yeah. Wow. It's great. Sorry, I was reading along the letter. I was like, wait, I can't read quietly on the show. And then you then just have a whole explosion of stuff about displays and store displays and this whole kind of thing. And I do really like this, Ron, that you do so much. You have so much, there's so much breadth to this whole article where you go to so many different areas that unless you're interested in toys, it's really interesting, right? But everything around the toys is great. I mean, just like the figures. So,
right. Yeah, well, I try to do, like I said with these articles, sometimes even my collecting, I mostly just collect the Kenner stuff, right? So I just try to thread together these things. So I always like, oh, here's the toy, but then it's fun to have like a developmental item, and then I like to sort of piece together all the advertising and marketing, and I think it's always interesting to tie that stuff together in a blog post. I mean, I just like to see that, like, okay, here's the toys we discussed, and then here's like an early newspaper ad showing these items at Children's Palace.
Yeah. No,
for whatever
the
reason,
context,
maybe I'm just weird,
yeah.
but I like stuff like that.
Well, yeah.
No, I mean there's some stuff in here I definitely had not seen before that I figured we'll touch on. But yeah, I mean the context of like those store photos where you see some of these items you're talking about there as they were used, that's the kind of stuff that really interests me. And just because you don't get to see that very often. So if anything else,
just,
like
lacing it all together into like a narrative, I think that's kind of what I like about collecting in general, or just even outside of toy collecting. Is just kind of like how objects can be brought together to kind of tell a story about something, and that's kind of what interests me about collecting and writing about collecting too, in a lot of ways.
And this article does it as well as anything you've done. I definitely like how you emphasize the different writing that's on the displays. So maybe we can move into the displays. So theoretically, the first Kenner display would be one that just says Star Wars is here. Is that right, Ron?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know what the first I would say is. In this article, I approached it that Star Wars is here motif was like an early motif, and it shows up on the early bird display, at least the poll display, and a couple of other things. But which came out first, I don't know. And I kind of mentioned this in the article too. There's also a chance that, aside from the early bird stuff, which had to be out in '77, it's possible the Star Wars is here thing didn't come out until early '78. I don't know if there's a way to prove that. I included an early internal Kenner photo showing the Star Wars is here dump, I guess you could call it. And it's stocked with explicitly '77 product.
Right,
and that's
right.
kind of what I've used is like, this is why I think that I do think these came out in '77, but there's not really a way to prove that, right? So I guess the only things that really had to be released in '77 were the early bird pieces, because that was when that thing was being sold. But my sense is that the Star Wars is here display, which is intended to circle like a product dump, the Toy Galaxy, which kind of went with that.
Now, your terminology is confusing me. What do you mean by product dump?
It's like that Star Wars is here thing is like a.
It's like a cylinder. It's like a big
drum
drum
that goes around. It goes around a wire thing that you put product inside.
And that's called a dump?
Yeah, it's like a. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the terminology you hear for like something that it's like a bin in a store.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It's called a dump.
But this is an unusual one because it also has a pole in it,
Yeah.
and then has shelving assembled around it.
It's very ungainly.
And apparently, apparently it was a Play-Doh display that they were repurposing for, I think, Play-Doh. It says on that instruction sheet.
Yeah.
But if that wasn't released in '77, it had to have been released in, I would say, early '78, and I think it was intended to be released in '77. I think that was the idea, right? So, but it's hard to prove. But the idea, the whole Star Wars is here campaign, I think the whole idea there is to make people aware that, after a couple of months, here's the first Star Wars product, right? And that would have been in holiday in the fall of '77. So this is kind of like, this is just kind of like a review of what I would say were those early displays.
Now, Steve, I know that you edit other people's stuff and you don't edit Ron's, and I still don't know the password for the blog. So I'm no editor for the blog, but we gotta get Ronnie Baby out of his own head. Baby, you got to roll with this. This was late '77. There's no question about it. The public doesn't want to read this. Maybe it was this. Maybe it was that. You get a good story, you run with it. Someone came up with the whole Kenner wasn't ready, and that's still with us. You are like 9/10 of the way there on this.
Well, fortunately, we don't work for some BS media organization, so we can be fairly open with doubts about things. But yeah, I think I put that in there like. I'm framing it this way because that's the way it suits the article. But whether that stuff hit in actual late '77, I mean, it's probably not possible to prove right now. It could have hit in early '78, but yeah, I would say this is the suite of early display product like that was intended to hit when the early product hit.
And this huge unwieldy dump It's just a gigantic, unwieldy dump on the floor
Tower.
with all of these, like, with the
It's like
escape from
Jenga.
Skywalker, the puzzles, the dip dots. It's just,
Yeah.
I mean,
I just worry that if you took out one of those puzzles, the whole thing would come crashing down.
Yeah, it's really weird. But the cool thing about that photo is that it's all the early product,
Yeah.
right? It's
Right,
just all
right.
except for Plaints, which doesn't really fit.
Right.
And I do have, I didn't use it in the article, but I do have an early a drawing of that same display, and that does show Plaints in it. You know, it's like an artist rendering.
Yeah.
But the photo doesn't show it because I think they probably had a hard time fitting it in there.
And I think we could think about it as Star Wars is here is the 77 thinking, and Star Wars Toy Galaxy is the 78 thinking. Because, like, Star Wars is here announces that when the grandmother walks into the store and has to find something, she doesn't care if it's a dip dot or it's a toy, so she just goes, oh, it says
Right.
Star Wars. And then Toy Galaxy, you can transition into that and say, here's where the actual toys are going to go, because a dip dot is not a toy, no matter what those guys say on Generation Skywalker. You know, it's just not a toy. So it's cool because it seems like they're hybrid displays where they're kind of getting ready
It's
for this
true.
transition.
Yeah, I mean, Toy Galaxy was the slogan they used for the 78 product line, and later on it became Toy Center in 1979, so that there's some
Right.
truth to that. But
Yeah.
I think there's ample evidence that the Toy Galaxy sign was developed along with the Star Wars is Here sign, and there's some early, like, concept renderings and stuff that I think kind
Yeah.
of show that I included in the blog.
Yeah, this is some of my favorite stuff in this is these concept renderings of this stuff. So, like, you show an image of the in-store promotional kit, which
Right.
has some of those factors, large character standees, which
Yeah, I love that because it just ties it all together. And it's like,
Yeah.
when I saw that, there was at some point some question of whether what those factors, the Kenner branded factor standees, you know, for people who don't know, factors made these life-size standees of the droids and then Chewie and Darth Vader, right? And
Right.
they were consumer items, but very rarely one turns up with a Kenner logo on it. And the idea there is that, you know, we were told years ago by Kenner folks that, yeah, we rebranded those things and used them as store displays. But it's like, okay, how do you prove that? Well, when I saw this painting, or a reproduction of a painting, it immediately sort of tied it together to me. I'm like, okay, there's these two standee items. It's like, those have to be the factors standees. And it's got the Star Wars is Here, you know, what we call the wrapping for the dump, and the Toy Galaxy on there. I know what those are, and it's in this in-store promotional kit. So here's a plan that Kenner had to send these standees out with these Kenner displays as early display items. And I'm like, wow, that just ties everything together. But then there's, like, some rectangular objects in here that are just graphical in nature.
Mhm.
And it's like, I could never, for a while I was like, I don't know what those are. Are those supposed to be carded figures? I don't know what those are. But then, yeah, well, it turns out yes, but, you know, years ago, I think it was Pete Vilmer maybe had a Factors poster that also had that same Kenner sticker on it, right? The same sticker
Right.
that's on the standees. And that was like, bing, ding, ding, like, oh, that's what those are. Those are four Factors posters with Kenner stickers on them.
Mhm.
And so then I spent years trying to find a Factors poster with a Kenner sticker because I knew it had to be out there because I'd seen one, and it was in this image. And, you know, sure enough, finally I found one, and I included the photo in here for the first time. I think there's only, that I've ever heard of, like two of those that I've ever heard of, right? But,
See, this is the
That's
bombshell in the middle of this whole thing, and if you've stuck with my horse hockey, then this is your reward. This, you know, when you talked about, or when you revealed to the world the existence of the Kenner Factor displays with the Kenner sticker, like, that was amazing. And now we have, like, totally unheard of, the sort of cheesy Factor posters with a Kenner,
Right.
blue Kenner sticker in the bottom corner. And that does appear to be exactly what's shown in this presentation, this internal Kenner presentation as well. Like, it just all ties together. And how many Factors posters were there? There was
Yeah,
there's
that was going to be
there's
my next
Vader
question.
making the goofy thing. There's the droids. There's the
yeah, I'd
Hildebrand.
have to see which ones came out first in '77. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but it could be there are 4 different ones, and that's why there's 4 different ones shown in this Kenner painting. But I'm not sure off the top of my head. There's it depends on what was released in '77. You have to look at the earliest wave to determine, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure. There's certainly the Hildebrandt one. I think there's a Vader one. I think there's a Luke one. Right?
Is there a Leia one? I get
there's the Leia
sometimes.
one where she's making that kind of sassy face. Well,
that's what I'm.
I don't know if that's like a '78 release. It's off the top of my head. I'm not sure what the early Factors releases are. But even then, like, there was 4 Factors standees, and they all show up with Kenner logos. But in this image, there's only the droids. So how accurate it is, or maybe the droids specifically were in this promotional kit, and the other 2 weren't because they're larger. Hard to say without, hard to draw too much conclusion from this, but also, hard to deny too much either.
Yeah, I mean, you have that in-store photo, was it from Foley's, where you see all of these pieces kind of, they're all utilized in some way. Yeah,
it's crazy. All the Star Wars is here, cut up into panels. The Toy Galaxy, the 2 droids, and then you can see that must be one of the early Factors posters. The droids, right? It's the painting of the droids, and you can see the sticker in the lower corner.
Right.
Wild. Yeah. It's kind of like, oh my God, this ties it all together.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about like being, finds in the wild and stuff. It's like, oh wow, did you find a 20-back snaggletooth and did you buy it off some grandma for $100? Like, okay, yeah, that's interesting, but this is like real. This is real archaeology. This is awesome.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. When you can find or catalogs, that's one of the reasons I love catalogs. You just find old catalogs, and it's sort of like nails. Like, okay, this is what was released in this year. Here it is in the catalog. Or here's a photo, and you can kind of go back and this is this year, and it shows all these items together. Like, that's just is like a great collecting. That's the kind of stuff I like about collecting.
And just to go back to this image again, so this is the internal Kenner presentation from the summer of 1977. It has these 4 posters, but it's clear that they were not in contact with Factors about what the posters would look like, because these are like, first of all, we have like Luke and Leia in front of like some kind of half-assed Mondrian painting.
That's kind of like, I think that was a puzzle image, wasn't it? Them on the about to swing across the gantry.
Yeah, but it's totally stylized, and then there's C-3PO and R2-D2 again stylized with this cool background. Han and
yeah, they're not accurate.
Yeah, Han and Chewie look like they're in the yellow submarine, and then we have Darth Vader, the Macquarie image of Darth Vader attacking of a stormtrooper attacking Luke. Right, that's the pose of the stormtrooper with the lightsaber attacking Luke, but instead it's Vader and I'm pretty sure it's not. Instead, it's Vader attacking Obi-Wan.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Right.
Well, 1 second.
Yeah,
Macquarie,
they're not accurate, but I'm confident that those are the posters. I think that either they didn't know, maybe they weren't aware of what exactly the images were, or the guy painting this just didn't really give a crap, about how accurate it was. But they're not accurate to what the posters actually look like.
Yes, you're definitely right, Steve. It is Macquarie, the Vader, with that very strong line with it across, but he's actually going off against Luke here, right, as opposed to against Obi-Wan.
Right.
And in this toy thing, it's this very dynamic, something we never got in the movie, an interesting fight between Vader and Obi-Wan, and we have it here. Wow. Yeah. So this takes then, if you consider yourself to be a Kenner Star Wars poster collector, you now have 4 extremely difficult variations to track down. I think if you're a Star Wars display collector, I think your collection's not complete without the Factors displays. This is just a lot of really cool, very hard to find stuff.
Yeah. I also really like, just as a secondary piece of evidence for the Factor standees, that other rendering of the 2 droid standees with that crazy huge black backdrop with the shelving and all that. Did anything like that actually get produced? And I don't think I've ever seen any display area that's quite as. Yeah. This almost looks like a trade show or something, more than a toy store.
Like a trade show. I don't know if it's intended to be that.
Right.
But it's interesting. Like, I wrote this here the graphics for both the Toy Galaxy and the Star Wars is here are present there. It's almost like they split those into 2 different displays. So I would guess that that's before they came up with the two different displays or something. But Todd Chamberlain had that image, and he was kind enough to let me use it, and
that's
kind of ties
awesome.
in. But yeah, there's nothing like that was really made, as far as I know. I mean, there was some big, placards used to demonstrate displays at Toy Fair, but they don't really look like that. And I think that was the later year. But yeah, I want to say this is an early concept for some sort of in-store, like branded corner, and at some point they decided it was more practical to break that into two smaller displays to send out to people. That would be my guess.
Wow. So, hey y'all, it's Sky here. I'm editing the show. I'm almost done. And it's funny because after I hit stop when I was recording, Ron was like, is this going to be up soon, or is this going to be out like, within a month? And at that point I was super confident it would be done, like within the week. So I'm like, yeah, it'll be done within the week. I didn't realize it was like spring break for my kids and I was super busy and I had to do all this grading. So it's taken me like 3 weeks to edit this episode. But the good news is this. In that time, on the Deal or No Deal webpage on Facebook, the Chris Georgoulias put up for sale some of these exact items, some of these pictures of the early displays with the Factors items. So I'm going to tell you about it, and it'll be kind of a market watch as well. Okay, so he posted these on February 21st, and he listed them as early Kenner 8x10 marketing display photos, original prints. So on the one hand, you have the one that we discussed in some depth with R2 and C3PO and the 4 posters that are presumably representing the 4 Factors posters that would get the Kenner stickers. Then there's the one that Steve likes so much with R2-D2 and C3PO on either side of the display stands, the display cases, which we just discussed. But then there's one which Ron did not discuss, and which I've never seen, and which makes me very excited. It has this kid standing in front of the 4 Factor displays that had the Kenner stickers. So the Chewbacca, R2-D2, C3PO, and Darth Vader, right? These things which Ron explained were some of the earliest store displays where they simply took a Factors display and put a Kenner sticker on it. So you see this kid holding up like a Kenner lightsaber fighting against the Darth Vader, the Darth Vader standee, the kind of standard early Darth Vader image with him having his diagonal lightsaber. And then another kid like with his arm on top of R2-D2. And it's a very charming image of sort of like imagining what these standees might look like in the store, how kids might interact with them, presumably how they might sell them. So I am now going to take you through the process of the bidding. Initially it was $200, and then I posted on there saying, well, you better bid these up because the value is going to go up after the next Kivecast. It then went to $400, $450, $500, $550, $600, $650, and finally, the final bid went $750 to one of the absolute kings of toy displays and just general collecting, Will Grief. So it's cool. I actually I messaged Ron. I was like, hey, what did you think of those prices? He said, yeah, it makes sense. Around $200 is what people, is what he thinks each of these sheets is worth. I think Will got a deal. I think he put these in a frame and they're amazing items. I sort of regret not going higher, but I don't know. It's not Chewbacca enough. So anyways, there you go. It's cool because there's another thing which wasn't mentioned in the article which came out in this, and we get to see what they're worth today. All right, back to the show. Just to set you up here, I'm going to be talking about this photo of the department store Foley's. And you can see a lot of these Factors posters and Factors store displays displayed the way that they were shown in those photos, or at least close to them. And it's an amazing image. If you haven't seen it, look at the enhanced version or find it on the blog. Dear God, it's the coolest image of a store in the vintage era ever. So take a look at it. All right, back to the talk. It must have been pretty cool. I mean, this thing from Foley's seems as close as we can get to Christmas 77. I mean, there are Star Wars toys there that were made after, but I think it is irresponsible not to assume that this was made for Christmas 77 and they just kept it up, because who would want to do a whole new thing? Like, this is a time capsule
Right.
of Christmas 77, and they just took out the stupid dip dots and put in the dewbacks, you know?
Right.
Yeah, well, a lot of those displays definitely hung
Stuck
around
around,
for years,
right?
because I have access to like a whole archive of store photos, and you'll see displays released in like 1980 and they're still around in 82. You know, sometimes they're beat up, or that somebody takes them off the rack and puts them on the wall or something. But displays were used back then for quite a while.
It was just, well, Star Wars was just always around, so I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, it was always on store shelves, so you know, why not?
Wow. And then you close it all up in a nice kind of circular way with the display for the early bird certificate, which we talked about at length in some episode with Will Grief and Todd Chamberlain.
That's right.
God, Steve, do you have any idea when we recorded that?
That's a great story.
It was around a celebration, I feel like, not long after, because I feel like it was at one of those Orlando celebrations where they told the story about finding it. So, I mean, it was years ago.
Well, no, they mentioned that this thing existed and that no one had it. And someone, during the celebration, someone raised their hand and said, "We've already got one."
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a great story. I remember sitting in the back of the room and being like, "Geez, golly." But yeah, I was fortunate to get one a few years ago, and it's really one of my favorite items. Super rare. There's probably only 4 or 5 around. But yeah, funny story. When I bought this from this guy, and I offered a lot of money. I told the guy I'd give him cash, and there was some other stuff involved too. And Brock Walker helped me out buying it. Brock Walker met this guy with like maybe it wasn't a brown bag, but I assumed he met him with like a brown lunch bag full of like hundreds. He called me. He's like, "We did the deal in the back of the car," and he just handed this guy this huge bag full of like tens of thousands of dollars worth.
Brock had
cash.
the backpack. His famous backpack full of cash.
I just remember that day texting him and being like, "Did you do the deal? Did you do the deal? Did you do the deal?" Yep. So yeah, he helped me out with that. But I finally got one. Great piece, and you don't see one around. And that also has the Star Wars is here verbiage, right? So I think people are familiar with the bin for the early bird thing. You know, the early bird envelopes go in the bin. This was more of I guess more of a centerpiece, like a bigger eye-catching display that you would have seen when you walked into a store for the early bird package. And it's really just one of the coolest Kenner displays. So.
Well, yeah, instead of the black, you get that really bright red that you don't see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really cool.
Awesome.
And it kind of folds up like a pizza box.
Right.
Interesting. It's pretty fragile. That's another thing.
Yeah.
Gee, Steve, it's kind of like I learned something in this episode. Maybe Kenner did know what they were doing. Maybe these are just interesting times, and instead of just mindlessly looking for sets of figures with the same grade from some arbitrary grading company, I should spend more time thinking about the toys that I love to collect.
You've learned your lesson.
I have.
All right,
And you can see, like, at the accreditations at the bottom of the article there, I already mentioned Todd helped us out with some photos, and then also the mysterious Eddie. I asked Eddie, I'm like, how do you want to be credited as a thank you for providing some photos? And he's like, there's only one Eddie in this hobby, bro. Just say Eddie. Okay, say Eddie.
Well, what happened to Fluffy?
So thanks to Eddie. I think he's retiring it because there's only one Eddie, so...
Fluffy's dead. Fluffy's dead. Eddie survives.
Eddie Eternal.
Yeah, he helped out with some photos there, so including the store photo of Foley, so that was an Eddie contribution.
Wow. Wow. Well, very, very cool. Wow, Ron. Well, thank you for enlightening us all, and continue on in this whole great series about what was actually going on in the early days of Kenner. Because as I said in the intro, I think you're the only person paying attention.
Plus we got to talk about the Burgermeister, Burgermeister, whatever his name is.
Yeah. I don't know. I might have to just, conjure up some kind of costume to represent that guy. With the T-shirt that just says we sell toys, not promises.
Yeah, well, it's true. Well.
Yeah.
Well, all right, I appreciate you guys having us on. Us on. What am I? I'm starting to sound like the Queen or something. Having me on here to talk about this. Always fun.
Yeah, it was overdue. So thanks
Yeah.
again.
Hey, Steve, we don't do outros on these.
Nah.